All right, so we are in the week October 19th to the 22nd. So we're covering muscular tissue and muscular system. Corresponds to sections 9A and 9B and 10A and 10B in the textbook, or your lab manual rather. So you have, I believe, one post-lab activity due this week, and then you've got some pre and post labs due next week. All right. Now, we'll also be going over muscular system next week. A lot of the axial musculature as well as some physiology. We'll have a review on the morning of, or on November 2nd, and then you'll have practical November 4th. Now, you'll also have a video project due where you have to make a 2 to 4 minute video covering 5 muscles, the function of those muscles, as well as their origin and insertion, where they attach to the bone. All right. So, and you can upload that as a video directly to Canvas or via YouTube and submit the link. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right. So we are actually going to skip ahead and come back to muscles of the face and neck. Let's see. All right, so we're going to start with muscle tissue. Yeah. So 3 types of muscle tissue. You should be familiar with this already. So you have skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, smooth muscle tissue, right? Obviously, you find skeletal muscle tissue with skeletal muscles. Cardiac muscle, you find the heart. Smooth muscle, you find usually inside internal organs. Skeletal muscle is voluntary. Cardiac and smooth muscle are involuntary. Okay. Now, skeletal muscle has multiple nuclei per cell. Cardiac and smooth muscle are single nuclei. Cardiac muscle is branched. Skeletal and cardiac muscle are striated. Cardiac muscle has intercalated discs. So I wanted you to be able to see some of those differences. A little more about that. Again, in terms of structure, skeletal muscle, you have these kind of long striated muscle fibers, multiple nuclei per cell. Voluntary, produces movement in the body. Cardiac muscles, branched. Okay, you have intercalated discs that allow the cells to communicate with each other. Also striated, you can see the little lines. Okay, it's found only in the heart, it's involuntary. Makes the heart beat. Smooth muscle, spindle-shaped cells, basically tiny on the ends, pointed on the ends. Single nucleus, the walls of hollow organs, also involuntary. Okay. All right, talk a little bit about levels of organization in muscle tissue. So you have different levels of coverings. Okay, you've got the epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium. Epimysium covers the whole muscle. Now, inside that muscle, you have bundles of fibers, and these are called fascicles, and they are covered by this tissue called perimysium. Now, fascicles, I guess, are made up of fibers, and those fibers are surrounded by endomysium. Okay. Now, each fiber is a muscle fiber cell, has cytoplasm, which we call sarcoplasm. Okay. It's a nucleus, multiple nuclei, lots of mitochondria. Okay. Sarcolemma is the plasma membrane. Okay. Has blood supply, nerve supply. Here's an axon. Okay. But you have whole muscle, fascicle, fiber. Okay. Now surrounding those, you have epimysium, perimysium, endomysium. Okay. So summarize. The structure is covering whole muscle, and its covering is epimysium. Fascicle, fascicles, which are covered by perimysium. And you have fibers, which are covered by endomysium. Okay? Just make sure you keep that straight. And just to review what we already covered. Skeletal, cardiac, smooth, all right. So only skeletal muscle is voluntary. The other two are involuntary. Skeletal muscle also has multiple nuclei per cell. The others just have one. The other thing you want to make sure you know is are they striated? All right. So put a question mark there. And answer is yes. For skeletal, yes. Cardiac, no. For smooth. So if I ask you which type of muscle tissue has intercalated disc, you would tell me cardiac muscle tissue. If I ask you which types of skeletal muscle are involuntary, you would tell me cardiac and smooth. Okay. So those are the ways that you can sort out the information. But if I said which type of muscle tissue is involuntary, one nuclei per cell, and striated, you would tell me cardiac. Okay. All right. So at some of your tables, not all, there's got skeletal muscle fiber cell. We're going to kind of go over that in a minute. We also have, so right there, that one is you have both skeletal and a cardiac muscle cell. There's a smooth muscle. Well, actually, that's a smooth muscle cell because of the shape. That one is more branched, and so that's cardiac. All right. Levels of organization, more on this. Again, whole muscle surrounded by epimysium. It contains fascicles. Fascicles are surrounded by perimysium, and they contain muscle fibers. The fibers are surrounded by endomysium, and they contain myofibrils. Okay. Myofibrils are surrounded by sarcoplasmic reticulum, okay, and they're made up of sarcomeres. Okay. And the sarcomeres go from Z line to Z line, called Z because if you look at them, they kind of zigzag. All right. Now, you also have filaments here. So we have in kind of blue, we've got our thick filament. And in red, we have our thin filament. It's the area where you only have thick filaments. We call that the M lines in the middle. Well, the M line is the line, but the whole area where there are thick filaments only is the H band. Okay, and you kind of have to look sideways, but you can see a bunch of H's. Okay, but the H band is where you only have thick filaments. The M line is in the middle of that area. I band is where you only have the thin filaments. Okay. Now, A band is the length of your thin filaments, or sorry, length of your thick filaments. And A we go by, to help you remember this, we go by the second letter. So LIGHC, the light band, and the A band, the ARK, the dark band. Okay, so go by that second letter. It's dark because of the thick filaments. I band is light because of the thin filaments. Okay. Yes.
The thick ones is the actin and the thin is the myosin, right?
The thin is the actin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so think about the thicker word, thick filament. Okay. Thinner word, actin, is the thin filament. Or shorter word. All right, so let's take a pause there, and I want you to review the types of muscle tissue with your partner at your table, and review the levels of organization in muscle tissue. You can do this at home as well. Okay, so if we look at our levels of organization again, you have your epimysium, contains your whole, surrounds your whole muscles, composed of fascicles that are surrounded by the perimysium, muscle fibers surrounded by endomysium. So if we look at a muscle fiber now, you can see a little bit of that endomysium covering it, and you can see these individual myofibrils. Okay, so you can also see the sarcoplasmic reticulum here in blue, and the transverse tubules that go through. Okay, and on either side of the transverse tubules, you have terminal cisternae. Okay, it's where you store calcium. Our sarcolemma is our plasma membrane surrounding the muscle fiber. Okay, you can see all the myofibrils and the myofilaments inside, like the thick filament and the thin filament. Okay, all right, so the space in between the sarcolemma and the myofibrils, the cytosol. If you look at this space here with the two terminal cisternae and a T tubule, We call that a triad. So it's a triad because 2 plus 1. And there's your opening of your T-tubule. Okay, like I said, some of your tables have skeletal muscle fiber models on them. So if we were to do a cross section, again, you can see here's your myofibril. You can see the thin filament that's actin and the thick filament that's myosin. Here's a bunch of mitochondria. You need those to make ATP. Here's your sarcoplasmic reticulum, 2 terminal cisternae and a T-tubule, makes a triad. Okay, all these are cross sections or individual myofibrils. Here are all those multiple nuclei. All right. So I'll give you a minute. Try to identify as many of these structures as you can. There's a skeletal muscle fiber model at the table. Nobody's using that. There's one over here. There's nobody at this table. So someone wants to grab that one. Let's see. Let me find some more for you. So let's talk a little bit about sarcomere. So with the sarcomere, as I mentioned, sarcomere is basically from Z line or Z disc to Z disc. All right, so you've got your thin filament, your actin, and your thick filament, your myosin. The middle is your M line. Space where it's just thick filament is H zone. Okay, your whole space of thick filament is your A band or dark band. Now, you're going to have some space where there's overlap between the thin and thick filaments. We call that the zone of overlap. Okay. All right. Now, you also have a bit of elastic filament to keep the sarcomere in place. Okay, but those are the different structures of the sarcomere. So there's a few tables here in the room where we've got sarcomeres that you can look at and see the thin filaments and the thick filaments and the heads on the myosin. Okay, and again, it's kind of marked here. So like from the length of the thick filaments, again, that's your H zone. Length here, just space where there's only thick filaments. So, yeah, then that's your H zone, whereas this is your A band up here. Okay, space where you just have your thin filaments. Okay, it's your I band. All right, so just think about it from an example of a test. If you were to see something like this labeled, you know where the different parts are. Okay. So in this part represents the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the terminal cisternae, T-tubule. Right? 2 terminal cisternae and a T-tubule is a triad. Right? Yes.
On the principle, is it going to be some kind of handicap? Something I read that handout.
Not during the test, like you get the handout. Like I just posted some handouts of like, here are the things you need to know.
Okay.
All right, another view, again, of the A band, thick filaments, H band where there's just thick, zone of overlap, your I band that's just thin, okay, Z lines, thin filament, thick filament. Okay, your structure called the motor end plate. Okay, and it's basically where your synaptic terminal, the end of a neuron, is meeting up with the skeletal muscle fiber. Okay, so we call that, generally we call that region the motor end plate. So like we're on the region on the, I mean, it's typically specifically basically the part of it that's the skeletal muscle fiber. That's the motor end plate. The space where the muscle and the neuron touch, we call that a neuromuscular junction. But the muscle side, we call that motor end plate. So, okay. So, I'm going to do it this way. So, assuming, we'll just say, these are all right. So this is our cell body. Okay, it's from dendrites. This is the long axon. And here's our neuromuscular junction. Okay. This is our axon terminal. Okay. We call this side the motor end plate. Part of the skeletal muscle fiber. So where the neuron and the muscle come together is neuromuscular junction. The side of the muscle that's touching that junction is the motor end plate. Okay. All right. So we're actually going to go back toward the beginning now. All right. So let's look at the muscles of the face and the neck. So we're going to go through these a few at a time. Hopefully everybody's table has a face or muscles of the head and neck at your table. So it made you learn all those terms, like for the bones and everything, because it also affects the muscles. So covering the frontal bone is the frontalis muscle. Its action is to raise your eyebrows and wrinkle the forehead. Okay, so I'll date myself a little bit here, but you know, before he was just Dwayne Johnson, he was The Rock, right? And you know, he used to raise his eyebrow when he was a wrestler a lot, so he had very good control of his frontalis muscle, right? So another muscle here is orbicularis oculi. Okay, orbicularis, the root word in here is orbit. Okay, and orbits are circles, right? Oculi has to do with the eye, so it's the orbit around the eye. It's involved in closing your eyelid, blinking, and squinting. Okay. So, zygomaticus. Okay, look at that. Where is it attaching? What bone? Zygomatic bone. Okay. It raises the lateral corner of your mouth for smiling, so you can move the sides of your mouth with your zygomaticus. Now you have another orbit, orbicularis oris. Okay, so that one is an orbit around the oral region, the mouth. So it's for closing and protruding the lips, speaking, kissing, whistling, right? So then we've got a muscle down here called depressor labii. And as the name of the muscle suggests, it depresses the lower lip, pulls it down. We also have another muscle, and this is depressor labii here, and this one is depressor anguli oris. Okay, it depresses the angle of the mouth. Okay, because the angle is more at the corners of your mouth. It depresses the angle. Okay, so I'll give you a minute, locate those structures. And you can be following along at home. All right, so let's cover another set. We got temporalis. What bone do you think it's covering? Temporal bone, right? So it's going to elevate and retract your mandible. Okay, the way that this is running, okay, is that attached to the mandible. Okay, elevate it and also do some retraction, pulling it back in. Occipitalis. What bone do you think it's covering? Occipital bone. All right, and it pulls the scalp posterior, pulls the scalp back, and it wrinkles the skin on that posterior surface of your neck. This large muscle here is the masseter. Okay, elevates and protrudes the mandible. So it elevates it, brings it up, protrudes it, okay, sticks it out a little bit. So, and for me to remember this one, sounds kind of like eating max. So if you think about elevating the mandible, it's like chewing, okay? Also here in the cheek is the buccinator muscle. And it compresses your cheek for whistling or blowing, okay? Yeah.
If I put frontal or occipital belly, will you count that?
Well, you still have to say belly of something. So I prefer if you just said frontalis or occipitalis and temporalis. So, and if you've got another manual that you're using, you may just want to mark it in your manual so you know what terms we're using. All right, sternocleidomastoid. Okay, runs along the neck, the side of the neck a little bit, comes toward the back, toward the front. Helps with flexion of the neck and lateral flexion. Okay, so since you have both on either side are flexing, helps you flex your neck forward. But if only one is contracting, you'll laterally flex your neck. Okay. So I'll give you a minute to find those 5. Okay, then you go on the other side of that one.
Okay, are there any other muscles deep to those ones on there on the skull?
Oh, yes.
There are?
Oh, yes.
We don't have to learn them? Okay, good.
Yes. I know you might also feel like it's a lot of muscles you have to learn. You have to realize there's really over 700. We're only giving a few. It might feel like a lot, but there's a lot more that we could cover.
Okay,
Yeah.
I have a question for
Sure.
like what they call heads of muscles. Are those like different muscles, or are they just different fascicles of the same muscle?
And they call it what muscles?
You know, head. You know, like a lateral head of a tricep.
Yeah, typically, like Shindar was referring to like bellies. So, kind of like a triceps or a biceps muscle will have like multiple heads.
Yeah.
So it's one muscle, but you kind of have clusters.
But it's just different fascicles.
They are, but it has to do. You know how we talked about the pinnate and the different types of way the fibers run. It has to do with that. So, okay. All right. So this is most of the muscles we've already talked about, but just looking at it from a different angle, you just realize that you may, as you're looking at the muscles, you may be looking at from the side of the face or the front of the face. So you may have a lateral view or an anterior or frontal view. So again, frontalis, temporalis, another view, temporalis, orbicularis oculi, zygomaticus, touching the zygomatic bone, orbicularis oris, masseter, buccinator, pressor anguli oris, pressor labii, sternocleidomastoid. This large, more superficial muscle is called platysma. Okay, so you've seen all of these already. Okay. Okay, so you asked about, are there any more internal ones? We're not going to make you go through everything, but we do want to show you the pterygoid muscle. Okay, it's got basically multiple bellies, and its role is to elevate, contract your mandible. Okay, it's sort of more on the inside of the jaw. So you can kind of see if it contracted, it would pull your lower jaw back up, your mandible up. Okay. So I'm not necessarily wanting you to know each and every muscle here. What I do want you to know is you know this bone, right? It's the hyoid bone. So it's not connected to other bones, it's only connected to muscles. Okay? So it is connected to a variety of hyoid muscles around it. Particularly, you have the digastric muscles and the omohyoid muscles. Right? The digastric is more superior, omohyoid is more inferior. So in these, you would just kind of have to know from looking at a picture if you were to see a picture of it. But we don't really have a model that shows that. Okay. Okay. Show you a view of the abdominal muscles. Okay. The oblique means at an angle. These are typically toward the close to the external portion of the body. So these are external obliques. They help rotate your trunk and laterally flex your trunk. Okay, internal obliques are deep to the external obliques. They also are involved in rotation and lateral flexion. So lateral flexion in the sides. All right, so that should make sense with the obliques because they're on the side of your body. If they contract, you're going to laterally flex. Okay. Now, rectus abdominis, the way the name is, it's going straight up and down. You're going to have more of just regular flexion of your trunk, flexion of your vertebral column, versus the obliques is lateral flexion. Okay. So here's transverse section. Okay, think about it like a person goes in for MRI and they kind of show the different sections of the body. So this is their anterior portion, this is the posterior portion. You know that because you see the vertebrae, which are in the more posterior portion of the body. Okay, here's the rectus abdominis. So if I was laying in the board or laying into the wall, that's my rectus abdominis. The external obliques, internal obliques, transversus abdominis. So we're introducing this muscle. What does it do? It increases your abdominal pressure during forced expiration. So like if you're forcing yourself to exhale, it's involved in increasing your abdominal pressure for you to do that. Near your vertebrae, you have a muscle called quadratus lumborum. And its role is to depress your ribs, pushes them down. Okay. And again, it'd be more if you saw a picture to know that. Okay. Okay. So these are portions of muscle called Erector spinae. And it's basically more of a deep muscle in the back. All right. I'll show you a few muscles, the pectoral girdle, and then back. Your pectoralis major, deep to that is pectoralis minor. So on some of your models, you can see that if you have a basically either short or tall body model on your table, you can see that. Okay, and we'll get a chance to see more of this on Thursday. But so you've got the pectoralis major in the shoulder, you have the deltoid. Here in this portion of the arm, you have coracle brachialis. I'll show you lower back. This long muscle here is the Platysma dorsi. This is the trapezius. And the neck, deep to the trapezius, is the levator scapulae. And as the name suggests, it elevates the scapula. All right. Here are more the medial side of the scapula. You have the rhomboid muscles, rhomboid minor and major. Major is larger.
So the rhomboid major, would it be like, is it closer towards the spine? or
Yes.
the-
Well, they both touch the spine. It's just rhomboid major is more inferior. It's going lower, and it's larger.
And it's what is something that, it's another part that separates them, right?
Yes. But also, I want you to know it's deep to the to your trapezius, so you're not going to see it unless you dissect and move the trapezius out of the way. Okay, so we'll get into the muscles of the arm next week, but do want to at least introduce a few things to you, more so the muscles of the back. All right. All right, so in the scapula, so here's your spine, your scapula above the spine, right superior to the spine is your supraspinatus muscle. Inferior to that spine is the infraspinatus muscle. And you've got your teres minor and teres major. So again, just introducing a little of this. We'll go into this in more detail. All right, but here's a good view again of the deltoid, pectoralis major. All right, so sometimes people who are in super good shape, they're lean, you can kind of see those muscles there on the side of their body, serratus anterior. Okay. They help to protract and inferiorly rotate the scapula. All All right, and they do run around to the scapula in the posterior portion. Deltoid helps to abduct the arm. So if you're contracting, your deltoid helps you do abduction of the arm. All right, pectoralis major helps with flexion of the arm, medial rotation of the arm, as well as adducting the arm. And so you may think, well, how does a push-up fit into that? If you think about it, when you do a push-up, I mean, you're pushing, but you're in a sense getting your arms to a flex position, okay? And so that you may not think of this as flex, but from a shoulder or from an arm standpoint, that's the flexion of the arm. All right, and we'll get into the deep muscles next time. I just wanted to introduce a few of these muscles to you. So, all right.